Well, as the weather heats up, we're seeing more and more runners pounding the pavement for exercise. However, you don't want to hurt yourself while doing it. Jonathan Ebersole of Sheltering Arms Physical Rehabilitation Centers joining me now to talk more about ways runners can protect themselves. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Talk about some of the common injuries that runners face.
Yeah, so some of the most common ones I see are pretty much lower quarter injuries. So I would say knee is probably the most common injury that I see. I also see IT band syndrome, which is the muscle on the outside of the thigh, the band of tissue that runs down there. I see shin splints, Achilles tendonitis, plantar fasciitis, things like that.
What are some simple ways to avoid those injuries?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing for runners is they need to remember to increase their mileage slowly. So we have a magic 10% rule that we tell runners. So that means that you don't want to increase your mileage by more than 10% from the previous week. So if I ran 10 miles this week, next week would be 11 miles, kind of 12 miles therefore.
Okay, all right, very good. What if a runner is out there and sustains that injury while on the run? What should that person do?
Yeah, so it's one of the hardest things to tell runners is to stop for a few days and try to let it to calm down. But that can really go a long way. So we use the RICE principle. That's rest, ice, compression, elevation. So take a few days off, see if you can get the injury under control. You may try cross training a little bit, so maybe trying, bicycling, something else that doesn't cause the same pain that running might cause. So those are probably the most important.
What if that doesn't work?
Yeah, so I think that'd be a great time to seek the advice of a medical professional. So a lot of times, physical therapists, we have advanced anatomy, so body knowledge, movement science, things like that. We can kind of analyze how the runner's doing, how they're their foot's meeting the ground, if there's any asymmetries, if they have weakness or flexibility issues. So
we're looking at you in action there with one of the runners as well. Talk about some of the new and exciting treatments that you all have for runners.
Yeah, so I think the most exciting one that we have is called the Alter G. It's a gravity minimized treadmill, and basically what that does is we can unload a runner from anywhere up to 80% of their body weight. So they can run maybe 50% of their body weight, not have the same knee pain that they would have at 100% of their body weight. I've also been doing some dry needling, which is using monofilament needles, the same needles that they use in acupuncture, finding trigger points, those kind of ball of tight muscle fibers in those big muscles, and then trying to release them with that needle. So it's had great success.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the advice. Thank you so much for joining us. And you can find out more information just by visiting the website Sheltering Arms Rehabilitation Centers. We'll be right back.